Have you ever felt like you're running on empty? Like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and no one sees how tired you truly are? What if I told you that God sees every drop of your exhaustion and has something powerful to say to you today? You're not forgotten and you're not alone. Fatigue. It's something that most of us experience at some point in our lives, yet it's often misunderstood. We see exhaustion as a weakness or a sign that we're not doing enough, that we're not strong enough, that we're not meeting the expectations placed on us. But what if this tiredness, this weariness isn't just something to be fixed? What if it's part of a deeper, more divine process, one that God allows to shape us in ways we might not yet understand? When we think about fatigue, we can often find ourselves in a state of frustration, believing that we've given all we have and yet still feel drained. Maybe it's a long season of hard work, an emotional burden, or even a spiritual dryness that seems unending. We push, we fight, we strive only to find ourselves weary at the end of it all. It's tempting to think that our exhaustion is a sign of failure or that we've been abandoned in our most tired moments. But what if God, in His infinite wisdom, is using that tiredness for a much greater purpose? Take a moment to reflect on the lives of the great biblical figures. Moses, for example, was one of the most powerful leaders in history, yet he experienced deep fatigue during his journey. The Israelites had just been freed from Egypt, but they were wandering in the wilderness, faced with hardships, doubts, and constant complaints. Moses, burdened with leading a rebellious people, reached a breaking point. In the book of Numbers, he cried out to God, "I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me." Numbers 11:14. Moses' weariness wasn't a sign of his failure as a leader. It was part of God's divine plan to shape him, to refine his trust, and to demonstrate his provision. Moses' fatigue became the backdrop for one of God's greatest revelations. God didn't remove the burden immediately, but instead he responded with a promise, "I will send you help." God's answer was not simply to lighten the load, but to make Moses realize that he needed God's strength, not just his own. That deep exhaustion led Moses to a place of greater dependence on God, a dependence that was crucial for the journey ahead. Similarly, the prophet Elijah experienced intense physical and spiritual exhaustion. After a major victory against the prophets of Baal, Elijah fled for his life from Queen Jezebel. He was drained, defeated, and at the end of his rope. He prayed, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life." 1 Kings 19:4. This was the cry of a man who felt he had nothing left to give. He wanted to give up completely, yet instead of rebuking Elijah for his fatigue, God sent an angel to give him food and water, allowing him to rest and be rejuvenated. God didn't scold him for his weariness. He gave him rest, physical nourishment, and then spiritual direction. What we can learn from Moses and Elijah is this: God does not see our fatigue the way we often do. We may see it as a sign of failure, as an indication that we're not strong enough or capable enough, but God sees it as an opportunity for us to encounter Him in a deeper way. It is in our moments of exhaustion that God is most likely to reveal His strength. When we are weak, He is strong. When we are tired, He is the one who provides rest. This doesn't mean that God wants us to wear ourselves out for the sake of it. God's heart is not for us to be endlessly burned out and broken. But He knows that life in a fallen world will bring seasons of hardship, trial, and yes, fatigue. And in those seasons, He wants us to understand something vital. He is with us even in our tiredness. He is not distant when we feel exhausted. He is present, waiting to offer us His peace, His strength, and His renewal. It's easy to assume that if we're tired, we must have done something wrong. We might think that we're not praying enough, not working hard enough, or not trusting God enough. But sometimes the exhaustion is simply part of the journey, a test, a refining process, a reminder that we are not in control and that we need God's help. It is in these moments that we are invited to let go of self-reliance and rest in His sufficiency. The Bible tells us that those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, Isaiah 40:31. It is not our own strength that will carry us through, it is God's. When we come to the end of ourselves, we are standing on the threshold of discovering God's infinite strength. That tiredness you're feeling right now might be the very thing God is using to bring you closer to Him. It is in your deepest weariness that His grace is most evident. He sees you, He knows you, and He is with you in your exhaustion, ready to renew your spirit in a way that only He can. So instead of seeing fatigue as a roadblock, see it as an opportunity, a chance for God to show you His provision, His care, and His power. Your tiredness is not a sign of weakness. It's a space where God's strength can shine brightest. Don't push through alone. Allow God to meet you in your exhaustion and let His strength carry you through. This is the hidden power of fatigue. It's not an enemy, it's an invitation. It's a call to rest, to trust, and to experience God's power like never before. Rest, in today's world, is something we often take for granted, or worse, overlook altogether. We've become so accustomed to the constant hustle, the demands of life pulling us in every direction, that the concept of truly resting feels like a luxury we can't afford. The noise, the busyness, the endless cycle of work and worry leave us feeling worn out and spiritually drained. But what if I told you that rest is not just a physical need, but a powerful divine tool that can realign our souls, refresh our spirits, and restore our strength? When we talk about rest in the biblical sense, we're not simply referring to sleep. Sleep is important, yes, but true rest is much deeper than that. It's the kind of rest that only God can provide, a peace that goes beyond our circumstances and allows our hearts to fully trust in His provision. This rest is not just the absence of work, it's the presence of God. It's a place where our souls can pause, breathe, and be renewed by the Creator Himself. In the beginning, God set the pattern of rest for all of humanity. After 6 days of creating the heavens and the earth, God Himself rested on the seventh day. And on the seventh day, God finished His work that He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work that He had done. Genesis 2:2. Now this rest was not because God was tired. He is all-powerful and doesn't need rest in the way we do. Instead, His rest was a declaration that His work was complete and He was satisfied with what He had done. It was a holy rest, a time for reflection, a time to enjoy the fruits of His labor. From the very beginning, God established rest as part of the rhythm of life. It wasn't optional, it was essential. And yet in today's culture, we've completely lost sight of this. We are constantly on pushing ourselves to the limit, striving for success, battling for recognition, and seeking to accomplish more than we ever thought possible. But in doing so, we've neglected the importance of rest, of taking time to pause and recharge. Jesus Himself modeled the importance of rest. Despite His miraculous healings, teachings, and the overwhelming crowds that followed Him, Jesus knew the value of stepping away from it all. In the Gospel of Mark, we read that after a long day of ministering, Jesus said to His disciples, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." Mark 6:31. Jesus, who carried the weight of the world on His shoulders, still recognized the need for rest. He invited His disciples to follow His example, come away and rest. But the kind of rest that Jesus offered was not just physical rest, it was spiritual rest. It was an invitation to find peace in the presence of God. It was a moment to step away from the demands of life and simply be with Him. Rest was a place of healing and renewal. For Jesus, rest was about refueling so He could continue fulfilling His mission. The same invitation is extended to us today. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This is not just physical rest, it is rest for your soul. A rest that can only be found when we stop striving, when we stop fighting on our own, and when we choose to trust in His gentle care. Jesus promises that the rest He offers is not a fleeting, temporary fix, it's lasting. It's the kind of rest that rejuvenates the soul, that restores your strength, and that replenishes your spirit. When we come to Him in our weariness, we don't just receive a few moments of peace, we receive the rest that only He can give, a deep rest that touches every part of who we are. True rest, then, is not simply about getting a good night's sleep or taking a vacation. It's about surrendering to God's timing and His pace. It's about trusting that He knows what we need before we even ask. It's about finding stillness in the chaos and allowing God to speak peace into our hearts. But there's more to this divine rest than just the feeling of peace. In those moments of rest, we also encounter God's strength. It's in the quiet, restful moments that God often reveals His plans for us. Just as a runner needs to pause and catch their breath to continue running, we need moments of rest to gather strength for the journey ahead. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Isaiah 40:31. God's rest is restorative. It's not just about stopping the work, it's about recharging so we can continue in His will with renewed strength and clarity. It's in those moments of stillness that God's presence fills us up, and we find the energy to move forward with purpose. Rest is also an act of faith. When we rest, we acknowledge that we are not the ones ultimately in control. We recognize that God is sovereign and that He holds the world in His hands. Resting in God is an act of trust, a declaration that we believe He will carry us through our struggles and weariness. It's saying, God, I am tired, but I trust You to renew me. So if you find yourself weary today physically, emotionally, or spiritually, take a moment to rest. Not just to sleep, but to rest in God's presence. Take a step back from the hustle and bustle of life and breathe in His peace. Let go of the pressures that weigh you down and allow God to restore your soul. Rest in the promise that He will renew your strength, heal your heart, and equip you for the journey ahead. Rest in Him and let His peace settle over you like a gentle river. God is waiting to give you rest, not just to pause your day, but to renew your entire being. Will you take Him up on His offer? When you're exhausted physically, emotionally, or spiritually, it's easy to feel like you've reached the end of your strength. Maybe you're facing a struggle that seems unending, a challenge that leaves you feeling defeated, or a season of life that feels overwhelming. The weight of it all can cause us to question, how much longer can I keep going? How can I continue when I'm running on empty? But here's the truth, when you are at your weakest, God is at His strongest. It's in our moments of deepest exhaustion and vulnerability that God's strength shines brightest. God doesn't expect us to carry the weight of the world on our own. He is there, ready to step in and provide the strength we need to press forward. His strength is not limited by our weaknesses. In fact, it's through our weakness that His power is made perfect. The Bible gives us countless examples of God's people finding strength in their most tired, most broken moments. One of the clearest promises of God's strength comes from Isaiah 40:29-31, where it says, He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might He increases strength. Even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Notice that it doesn't say those who have strength of their own. No, it says they who wait for the Lord. There's a profound truth in this. When we are weary, when we've given all we have, that is when God steps in to renew us. The strength He offers is not the kind that comes from our own abilities. It's a divine strength, a supernatural power that empowers us to keep going when we think we can't. God gives power to the faint. This is a promise for those who are tired, for those who are feeling like they've reached their limit. It's for those who have been battling for so long that they can barely stand. The very nature of God is to provide strength where there is weakness. His strength doesn't come from our human effort. It is freely given to us when we trust in Him. And it is in our weakness that we discover how powerful He truly is. Think about the Apostle Paul, who faced incredible hardships throughout his ministry. He was beaten, imprisoned, and rejected countless times. He was constantly under pressure, facing persecution for spreading the gospel. Yet in 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul says something incredible. He writes, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul understood that when he was at his lowest, that was when God's power was most evident. His tiredness, his suffering, was an opportunity for God's grace and strength to shine through. This is the paradox of the Christian faith. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. When we reach the end of ourselves, we are standing at the threshold of experiencing God's infinite strength. The exhaustion you feel today, the weariness that threatens to overwhelm you, is the very place where God can come in and carry you. It is in the valley of tiredness that you are best positioned to experience His sustaining power. Now let's consider what this promise of strength looks like in practical terms. First, it's important to remember that God's strength doesn't mean we'll never feel tired again. We still face challenges, still go through trials, and still experience moments when we feel drained. But God's strength is a supernatural power that enables us to endure, to rise above, and to continue on the path He has laid before us. In Psalm 73:26, David writes, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." This is a powerful declaration of trust. Even when our physical strength gives out, when our hearts feel heavy, God is there providing the strength we need to continue. When we lean on Him, we tap into a source of strength that is inexhaustible, a well that never runs dry. This promise of divine strength is not just for the future, it's for now. Right where you are in your exhaustion and your struggle, God is ready to give you the strength you need. This strength is not about pushing through in your own power. It's about surrendering to God, asking Him to fill you with His power, and trusting that He will provide. It's in that surrender that you find the strength to take the next step, to keep moving forward, and to continue walking in faith. God's strength also gives us the endurance to run the race He has set before us. In Hebrews 12:1-2, we're reminded, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith." Running with endurance is not about our own ability to push through without stopping. It's about looking to Jesus for strength, about relying on Him every step of the way. The promise of God's strength is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing source of empowerment. As we wait on the Lord, as we rely on His strength, He enables us to run without growing weary, to walk without fainting, and to soar like eagles, rising above the challenges and obstacles that seek to drag us down. So, if you're feeling tired today, remember this: you don't have to do it alone. God is offering you His strength. It's not about how strong you are, it's about how strong He is. When you are weak, He is strong. When you feel like you can't go on, He will carry you through. This is the promise that God gives to all those who trust in Him. At the heart of weariness, there is often a deeper issue at play, a lack of trust. When we are tired, when the burdens of life become too much to bear, we often find ourselves trying to handle everything on our own. We take on the weight of the world, convinced that it's up to us to fix it all, to make everything work. We strive, we struggle, and in doing so, we become exhausted physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But in the midst of our tiredness, God extends an invitation that changes everything. He invites us to trust Him. The invitation to trust God may sound simple, but it is profound. It is a call to lay down our own efforts, to stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and to let go of the fear that makes us feel like we have to be the ones to hold everything together. Trusting God is not just about acknowledging that He exists. It's about surrendering our need to control and placing our full confidence in His ability to carry us through the challenges we face. One of the most powerful passages in the Bible about trust is found in Proverbs 3:5-6, which says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths." This verse invites us to let go of our own attempts at understanding and control and to instead trust that God knows what is best for us. It's a radical act of faith that requires us to release the burden of having to figure everything out. God will direct our paths, but first we must trust Him enough to allow Him to do so. Trusting God is not always easy, especially when life gets tough. When we're tired and overwhelmed, it can be hard to believe that God sees our struggles or that He has a plan for us. We may question why we're facing certain challenges or why it feels like we've been carrying the weight of the world for so long. Yet in the midst of our confusion and exhaustion, God's invitation to trust remains unwavering. Trusting God means choosing to believe that He is good even when life isn't. It means acknowledging that while we don't always understand the why behind our struggles, we can trust that He has a purpose in all things. When we choose to trust God, we are reminded that He is sovereign, that nothing happens outside of His control. Our weariness, our struggles, our doubts, they are not a sign that God has forgotten us. Instead, they are opportunities to trust Him more deeply, to let go of the illusion that we can do it all on our own, and to rest in the assurance that He is faithful. This trust isn't passive, it's active. Trusting God means choosing to rest in His presence even when the world around us seems chaotic. It means choosing to believe that He will provide for our needs even when we can't see the way forward. It means acknowledging that God is with us in our exhaustion and that He is not indifferent to our struggles. When we trust God, we allow Him to carry the weight we were never meant to bear alone. There is a beautiful example of this trust in the life of King David. Throughout his life, David faced many challenges, from being pursued by enemies to dealing with personal failure. Yet in Psalm 55:22, David writes, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved." David understood that when he was overwhelmed, he could cast his burdens onto God, and God would sustain him. This doesn't mean that David didn't experience hardship. It means that despite the hardship, he knew that God was trustworthy and would uphold him through it all. Trusting God also means trusting in His timing. Often we grow weary not just because we're tired, but because we're frustrated with the pace of things. We want answers now. We want relief now. We want the storm to end, the struggle to be over, the pain to go away. But God's timing is perfect, and His ways are higher than ours. In Isaiah 55:8-9, God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Trusting in God's timing means accepting that we don't always know what He's doing, but we can trust that He is working all things for our good and His glory. In our fatigue, the invitation to trust is not just a call to surrender, it's a call to rest in the knowledge that God is with us. When we trust God, we stop trying to control our circumstances and start trusting that He is working behind the scenes. We acknowledge that we cannot do it on our own, and we let go of the need to fix everything. And in that act of surrender, we find the rest we desperately need. Jesus extends this invitation to trust in Matthew 11:28-30, where He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus doesn't just offer physical rest. He offers rest for the soul. And this rest comes when we trust Him enough to place our burdens in His hands. When we stop trying to do everything ourselves and trust Him to carry us through, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. The invitation to trust is not just about letting go of control. It's about receiving God's love, peace, and strength in the midst of our weariness. It's an invitation to rest in the truth that we are not alone. God is with us, and He will never leave us or forsake us. When we trust in His ability to carry us through, we find the strength to keep going, the peace to weather the storms, and the hope to see beyond our current exhaustion. So today, if you are weary, I invite you to take up God's invitation to trust. Lay down your burdens. Let go of the need to control. Surrender to His will, and allow Him to fill you with His peace. Trust that He will give you the strength you need, and He will sustain you through every moment of weariness.
Beneath the stars we whisper dreams. A violin plays soft, it seems. The night unfolds its velvet wings. We dance on air like fancy things. A crescendo builds with every beat. Our hearts, they dance in perfect heat. The world is ours in silent screams. We're floating high on whispering dreams. Together we are one sweet song. The night won't be too late, too long. Our melody will carry on in every note where we belong. The orchestra, it swells to life. The strings, they cut the dark like a knife. Your voice an echo in my soul.